Hello, I'm Dr. Brian Fraser, and in this tutorial I'm going to show how to pass data from one activity to another activity on the Android platform. Now this can be done in two ways, much like calling a function. You can call into a function by passing arguments, and then you return data with a return value. In the activity sense, everything is done with intents, and so we're going to pass data into a second activity using an intent, and then that second activity will return data back to the main activity, also using an intent. So I've created an Android project that we're going to demonstrate this with. Basically, we're going to do a simple math function. So to get it started, let's put in some text here. I'm going to have the user, so enter a number, and then the user is going to type in a number just below that. So I'm just going to do plain text here. We could probably come up with a better way to do it, but this will do for me. And I'm going to call it edit text user number. And that'll refactor everything required. Now, I'm going to not just read in the value, I want to basically do some math with this. So I'm going to put a button in here, and I'm going to call it button do math. And we're going to make the text here do math. So this is going to be the starting point. We're going to pass this value that the user types in to a second activity. Well, we're going to need a second activity, so let's go ahead and add one. So I'm going to right click on my project, new, and then under other, Android, I can say Android activity. That's going to go through and do all the work for me. I have to give it another name, and so I'm going to call this one math activity. Now it's created the XML file here under my layouts, activity math. It's also created my Java file, and if we look at the manifest, it'll have edited the manifest and put in here a new activity. So it's added this here to give my activity permission to run this new activity. Pardon me, give my application permission to run that new activity. So I don't need the manifest anymore. So when this gets called, the second one, let's get rid of that. Let's put in some text here. Something like user's number is, and I'm going to put in another text here, text view user number. Now this is a text view, not an edit view. Oops, I spelled that wrong, didn't I? Well, we can fix it here. Automatic refactor, which means that it's a display only. So we're going to give it something value here just to start with, no value. Alright, so what we want to do is we want to have the user type a value in on this first screen. So they'll type in, 53. They'll say do math, and then we want that to appear here on the second activity. So how are we going to do that? Well, we know how to start a new activity. So we've seen that in previous tutorials. So let's do that. So setup do math button. It's a good way to start. I'll put it in its own function. So that was Control 1 to generate this function for Eclipse automatically. I'm going to find the button. So button, I'm going to use find view by ID, r.id.doMath, and then I'm going to set the onClickListener. So button.set onClickListener, and it is in new. I'm going to create an anonymous class. I want a new under view. It's an onClickListener, and it automatically fills it in for me. Okay, so now what do I want to have happen every time I click this is I want to start that other activity. So I can say start activity, and I need to pass it an intent. So the way we'd normally do this is say new intent, and then I would pass in, using this second constructor here, I'd pass in some context and the class I want to start. So context is the this object for the activity I'm in. I can't just say this though because I'm inside an anonymous object. So I've got to say MainActivity.this, and I pass in the other class I want, so MainActivity.class. Okay, so let's just prove that that works. I'm going to run it in my emulator. Tries to connect. I've got another instance up, so it's not going to connect. And here we do. I click do math, and we get to the second activity. Okay, great, but we don't yet have a value coming up. No matter what I type in, nothing comes up on the second one. So let's fix that. So the first thing we're going to have to do is actually get that value. Now I want to be careful when I want to get the value. A temptation might be to put the code in here. So for example, it's an edit text. It's an edit text. User text entry equals, I cast it, find view r.id dot, and I'm looking for the edit text number, and I'll import the appropriate things there. Now I'd want to say user text entry dot get text, which gives me an editable back, and from this I need to call toString to actually get a string from it. Now I said I was going to deal with numbers only. I could just deal with strings, but numbers just kind of shows another way of dealing with this. So I say int user number equals, I'm going to call integer dot parseInt, and I'm going to parse user data. This program will crash if you type in something like hello, but that's okay. So this might be what I want, and then I'd start to use it down here. But I want to talk about timing first. We want to think about, when does this code get executed? This code gets executed, it's called by my onCreate. So onCreate loads the activity and then executes this code. So I'm going to start grabbing the text immediately, of which the user hasn't had time to enter. What I really want to do is I want to move this code inside my onClick listener. So later on, when the user clicks the button, I execute some code to grab the value. So I'm just going to move that down using Alt down to move it in here. So now when my code executes, I have the value the user typed in. I now need to pass it somehow into the other activity. And it turns out intents are the way to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to extract this intent into a local variable. So Alt-Shift-L, and I just moved it up into here. Now what I can do is I can start to put in extra data into this intent, which is called an extra actually. So I can say intent.put, and you can see here I can put all of these different extras. I can put in, if you look at the second argument, boolean, bundle, byte, char, all the way down any type of data I want. I'm going to put in an int. They're all put extra because they're overloaded. And I can put that in here. Now I need to give it a name, which is a string. So I'm going to call it parameter name for the short term. And I need to give it a value. So my value is going to be my user number. We'll come back and deal with this parameter name later on. Okay, and then I start the activity by passing the intent. That's great. If I run this code, nothing's going to happen because I'm not doing anything with the value. How do I actually catch that value? Well, inside my math activity, I need to be able to access that intent. So I have to first off get that intent. So intent equals, and then there's a method, getIntent. What this does is this gets the intent that I was called with, or I was created with. Control 1 to import the appropriate libraries. Now what I can do is I can extract from it. So I can say int myValue equals, I can call my intent dot, and then it is get. And then I've got a whole bunch of these different things. I've got like a get boolean intent, a get string intent. I have an integer in there, so I'm going to say getIntExtra. Or pardon me, these are extras, not intents. I need to give it a name, so I'm going to say parameter name, same as before, and I have to give it a default value. So just in case I wasn't given anything, let's say 0. Now I can do something with it. Well, what am I going to do? I want to put this on the screen. So that's going to be in a text view. Text view, and let's call this display number equals text view. Find view by ID, r.id dot, and I gave it a name of text. There we go. And so then I can say display num dot set text. Give it a character sequence. Well, how can I convert an int to a character sequence? Well, I can just concatenate. I can concatenate an integer with a string to convert it. That's a simple-minded way. My value. So I'm going to put in a comment here. Get the intent that started us. to find a parameter, which is to say an extra, and then I'm going to display the value to the screen. So that's a good start. Let's see if this works. Save both of those. We're going to get some exceptions here because I am not actually able to connect to it in the same way I should. Enter a number. Well, let's try 5. Do math, and there's the number. Okay, so that's half the battle. We got the number in here, and we were able to do something with it. So that seems like a fair amount of code just to get the number in, but it can be very useful. Imagine, for example, on your main screen, you've got a list of different values, for example, different maybe news stories. The user might click on one of them, and that gives you an ID for a news story. It then jumps into your secondary screen, which displays that news story. How do you know what news story to display? Well, you pass it in as an intent, or as an extra on an intent. So now let's actually do something with it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add a couple buttons down here. I'm going to either be able to double this number or, say, square the number. So you can either pass back, in this case, 10 or 25. So this way we'll actually do something with it, and then give it back to the main screen here. So we've already seen how to get the data in. Let's see how we get the data back, which is to say return a value from an activity. So to get that set up, I'm going to have to do a few things here. I'm just going to, first off, we're going to need the value to work with. So instead of having this as the value here as a local, I'm going to make it a field. So private int user value, or let's say value to work with, value to work with. And down here, I'm going to switch this to be value to work with, as well as here. And let's put a button on this activity. So here I'm going to add in, let's start off with a button in the bottom left. Let's say double it. Double it. And button, double it. Save that. Let's go back here. And now I'm going to set up double button. So to do this, we're just going to get a button. Find view by ID, r.id, dot button double it, dot set on click listener, new view, dot on click listener. And now what I'm going to do here is, normally to kill the activity or to finish it, I just call finish, and so that will end the activity. But I want to do something here, so I'm going to compute the answer. So int answer equals, well, I'm doubling a number, so this is just going to be value to work with times 2. So that's the answer I want to hand back, and so return answer to calling activity, much like we'd return a value to a from a function call. Now to do this, I need an intent as well. So intent, new intent. I'm then going to add into this intent, or put into this intent, the extras. So intent.putExtra, and give it a string. Well, let's call this the answer. I can use any string I like. It's simply how it's going to find the answer. And then answer here. Now note, I could put in a bunch of different things here. Answer 2, 3, 4, something like that. If I had a whole bunch of data I wanted to pass back, any amount of information can go in there, I suppose within reason. Okay, so now I've got the value heading back, but I have to do something to be able to catch it. It's not like a function call where you can simply say, well, just grab it, because if I go back here, the start activity does not, let's see if I can bring up the help for that, does not return anything. It's a void. So you simply can't say, well, give me the answer, give me the intent that it returns, because this is all event driven. So what I want to do is I need to have some extra way of catching a value. So the trick here is instead of starting an activity, I need to say start activity for, and then here we have for result. Now, the interesting thing is not only does it want an intent, it also wants this request code. So let's give it a request code of 42 for the moment. We'll come back and look at exactly what that is in a moment. Now this says, okay, start the activity. We're expecting a value to come back. I've already coded that over here. How do I actually catch it? So what I have to do is I have to override a function. So I'm going to go here, right click, source. I'm going to override and implement methods under. I'm now looking for the onActivityResult. onActivityResult. Click OK, and here we have it. So what happens is this function, I'll put a comment here, gets called when the activity we started ends. I'll say finishes, because that's what it's actually calling. So what do I have to do here? Well, I'm going to leave in the default call just because it's a good thing to call the parent. I believe it doesn't do anything for me. What happens is I get back this request code and a result code and some data. So I passed in this 42. That was the request code. So I can say now here, the way we usually do this is with a switch on the request code. I'm going to do a case of 42. What do I do in this 42? Well, I need to get data out. So I need to int answer equals, well, from data, which is my intent.getIntExtra. Oops, pardon me, I want to get a int extra. I know it's an integer because that's what I'm putting in the other one. I think I called it the answer. And I give it a default value. Let's just put in 0 because we know we're actually getting it back. Now what am I going to do with this? Well, if I go back here, let's put in drag in some text. Answer is, and put in some more text here. I'm going to call this one a text view answer. No answer yet. Save that, go back in here and find the view by ID. So this is a edit text answer view. Find the view by ID r.id dot, and now this is text view answer. Answer view dot set text character sequence. We're going to do the same trick of concatenating with a null string, or an empty string, pardon me. And there we have it. So that's a good start, at least. So what's going to happen is this gets called when the other activity finishes. It passes in the request code, which was from here, the 42. It passes in a result code, which we'll actually see in just a moment. And it passes in the data, the intent. Now, this result code, what's that? Well, in here I didn't set any result code, but I really should. What can happen is either we want to say, yeah, we worked, it's done, or no, it failed. So I'm going to say set the result, and then I need to set the result code here. Oops. Set the result, and I need to give it a either worked or not activity.result OK in this case. And then the data is my intent. If I don't do this, it's not actually going to hand any data back because it doesn't know what intent to pass back. So this is actually critical to make it work. So when my second activity returns the value in an intent, my first activity gets called in its onActivityResult. It checks to see which request it was, because I could have been calling 10 or 7 or different other activities. It finds out which one it was, and then handles it appropriately. So let's try this. So enter a number. And 1, 2, 3. Do the math. Click on double it, and it crashed. Okay, now we got to figure out why it crashed. So the best way is to pull up the log cat. Maybe text view. I tried to do a cast to a text view and cast a text view to an edit view. So this is actually a text view. Text view. Import that, and we'll run it again. Text view. Okay, let's try 5, do math, double it. See what went wrong this time. Log cat. Cannot cast it to a text view. Let's just double check what we got here. So, edit text user number. Oh, I'm kind of getting this backwards, aren't I? I want this to be a text view. Wrong piece of code. And this to be an edit view. So, pass in 33, do math, double it, and we get back the answer 66. Alright, so this was passed in an intent into the second activity. Double it creates a new intent and passes that back and gets called into here. So let's do a couple other things just for demonstration. I can add another one in here, so I'm not just going to double it. Let's have a square it. I can do a few other things. Let's make just for simplicity, I'm going to put a button here for cancel. Imagine that you don't want it to do anything. So I can put in a cancel here, and let's set that up to set up cancel button. Create that. I'm going to copy and paste this code because it's fairly boilerplate. Now what happens here is instead of it being result OK, I want to pass result cancel back. Maybe for some reason the user didn't want to do it. Maybe a network connection timed out, whatever reason. So I don't need to compute any answer. I'm simply going to cancel it and pass that back. So back here in my main activity, I want to handle that. So I was simply assuming that it was going to work out okay. So my result code, I was assuming it was always going to be fine. But let's actually handle that. So if the result code equals activity dot, and then I'm going to have it result cancel, I can do something here. So I'm going to say, handle that message. Let's just duplicate this and change it to be user canceled. And then I'm going to return, just so I don't set the value as well. So this shows how we can handle it if we don't actually want to complete it. If we don't want to say, well, look, it failed to work correctly. I click cancel. Let's go back into here. Okay, why is that not working? Cancel. Because I'm dibbling it still. Button cancel. Well, in fact, yeah, let's do that. Do math, and I click cancel. Comes back, and the user canceled. So we can send back that extra bit of state. One final thing I want to now show is how we can clean up this code a little. We've got the data going in, we've got the data coming back, but we've got some sort of magic stuff in our code. We got these things like strings like parameter name, just hanging out in the middle of nowhere. We have to use that in two different places and so on. So let's start off by cleaning this up. Remember, this is how we're passing data to the second activity. So back here on the first activity, I created this thing called parameter name. So let's extract that to a constant. I'm going to right click on it and then say under, it's not going to come up on the screen here, but refactor, and then extract constant. And what do I want to call it? Well, let's call this one extra and user number. Sounds good. We can see up here it's private. I'm going to make it public so I can access it from elsewhere. Copy it. And then under here, instead of using the same string in my second activity, I'm going to say MainActivity.extra number. So now they're both working on the named constant as opposed to a string. That way I can change the named constant here quite easily. Make it say user number, and it'll be changed in both places. So that's one constant. Another string we were using was this answer, the answer. So I'm going to extract that to a constant as well. So right click, refactor, extract constant, and let's call this extra answer. That's now up top here. I'm going to make it public. So main activity, when I actually go to use it, I head down here to the answer. So this now switches to MainActivity.extra, the answer. And so I can now use that in both places. I might want to switch this to a default, but that's fine, probably the way it is. The one other thing I'd use is this 42. That is quite the constant. So I'm just going to right click on it, refactor, extract constant, and this is the result code. So result code, and this is for do math. Now it's private because only inside of this activity do I need it. Result called do math is here, and I'm going to switch this up. So this is a special code that we get once that activity completes. So now I've kind of cleaned that up, switched to named constants. Okay, so that's all I wanted to show. What did we see? Well, we saw that we could use intents to pass it data in. So here's the code to actually set the data and pass it in inside of a button. Once I'm inside the activity, I then call getIntent to save the value, or sorry, to extract the intent. From the intent, I can get the integer extra, and I can then work with that value. I can then do anything I like with it. Once I'm done, if I wanted to, I can pass the value back. I do that using an intent here, and then I call setResult. So in here, I push the extra, put an extra into the intent, and then I pass back the intent. My main activity handles this inside of the onActivityResult callback function. Alright, thank you for watching. That's all for today.